Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Spotlighting Mental Illness in the Workplace. Before we start, I want to offer a gentle note of caution that unlike some of the other sessions this week, we're going to dive into mental illness, what it feels like, how it presents, the causes and triggers. We're going to get vulnerable and raw. So if you feel that this may trigger you in any way, please do what you need to protect your peace. With that, thank you for joining us. I'm sure it's no surprise to hear that mental health and well-being has risen high on the agenda for many businesses across North America. But severe or diagnosed mental illness issues often remain unspoken about. This session aims to break that taboo and stigma, spotlighting a range of employees with mental illness and understanding how it impacts them in their professional life, and perhaps how workplaces can do better to support their people, not just when they're struggling, but before that, prioritizing mental health with preventative measures and cultural change. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Ken Walsh of Medtronic. Ken works as an expert in project and program management, as well as data and analytics. His childhood was filled with addiction, mental illness, and family trauma, and he's overcome his own challenges with addiction and is proudly in long-term recovery. Ken is diagnosed with bipolar type 2 disorder and thrives despite these challenges in his life. He's a motivational speaker inside and outside of work, using his story of perseverance and hope to inspire others who may be struggling and to fight the stigma associated with mental illness and addiction. We also have Dorothy Bryant-Reed, who's a vice president and property and casualty client executive at USI in Seattle, Washington. She's in her 17th year working in the insurance industry, and Dorothy has also celebrated 11 years of sobriety. She lives this out loud, and it shapes all that she does in her personal and professional lives. Because she works with contractors whose industry is being ravaged by mental health and substance abuse issues, she's able to use her own experience to advise and advocate for solutions that work to give people the best chance at recovery. Her philosophy of amplifying the voices of those who have lived this experience as a tool is based on her own experience and countless others that she's witnessed. We also have Mike Kasdan from Lawyering While Human. Mike is a partner in the intellectual property group at the law firm Wiggin & Dana in their New York City office, and serves in their diversity and pro bono committees. For the last 10 years, Mike has also been in leadership at the Good Men Project, a nonprofit organization supporting men with mental health and substance abuse disorders. There, he's served in numerous roles on both the editorial and business side, including editing and running its mental health section, and now serves as director of special projects. He's written articles, appeared on television, radio, and podcasts. He's also developed videos and social media campaigns and created and led training and workshop groups focused on mental health for over a decade. His own personal experience with depression while practicing as a lawyer has given him unique insights that he's happy to share with us today. We also have Brother Luck, chef and author of No Luck's Given, which I love that name, by the way. Brother Luck is an award-winning chef, an author, an entrepreneur, an advocate for the pursuit of self-discovery. With a childhood marked by humble beginnings, Brother is on a mission to prove to others that while our past is forever a part of who we are, it doesn't determine the people that we become. By drawing on his own childhood trauma, Brother uses his life as a testament to prove how pride, courage, determination, and perseverance helped him survive early life challenges and empowered him to achieve great success in the face of adversity. Finally, I'm your facilitator today, Wendy Tamas Robbins. I'm a corporate tax and finance attorney at Holland & Knight in Boston with 25 years experience. I'm also a mental health and wellness speaker, coach, and advocate specializing in anxiety. I chronicled my own journey to finding freedom from almost 40 years of struggling with anxiety, obsessive compulsive, and panic disorders in my best-selling book, The Box, An Invitation to Freedom from Anxiety. I'm also the founder of Cave Club, an exclusive professional women's wellness community where there's coaching, peer support, meditations, and workshops. And I also work with companies with my signature corporate wellness programs that educate and empower corporate leaders and their teams seeking impactful change in their corporate cultures. I'm a member of the Wellbeing Committee at the Massachusetts Bar Association and Mindful Lawyers Society. And I've worked internationally with Thrive Global, BBC Studios, and Business in Heels, and been featured on NBC and Fox morning shows. I'm also the host of the Perfectly Panicked podcast on Spotify and Apple. So with that, in very little time to share so much powerful and inspiring content, let's dive in. Let's start with how the pressures of our respective industries have triggered and or exacerbated what we brought to the workplace. Let's start with Ken. Ken, can you talk about your personal experience with bipolar 2 and how that presented for you and how it impacted you in your workplace?
Sure. But first, I just want to say I found myself wanting to clap when I heard the stories of my fellow panelists. I wish we were in person. I could give them a hug. So inspiring, to say the least. My bipolar type 2 journey, I guess, starts with my mother. She was also bipolar type 2. She was also an addict like me. Ultimately, we lost her to suicide. But I wasn't diagnosed to bipolar type 2 until my mid 30s. And at that point, I think we had been seeing signs for years. And of course, drug and alcohol abuse is really common when you talk about bipolar. I think maybe up to about 40% of people with bipolar struggle with drug and alcohol addiction. So for me, when I got my diagnosis, people often ask me, well, how did it feel? What did you think? And I think for me, what it felt was relief. I finally had an answer or answers to what I was struggling with for so long. And I knew that attacking or addressing the underlying mental illness meant that I could find a way to freedom from my addiction. And so that led me on a long journey of, finding myself through counseling and therapy and medication and really changing my life and healthy living habits to ultimately get where I am today and thriving.
That's amazing. And talking about your workplace, did you find that it was difficult to come out and talk about your mental health issues and your addiction? Did you find that the stigma was strong there, or was it more welcoming for you?
I think at first I was scared. I thought I'd be judged. I thought the stigma was so great. And so I didn't talk about it for many years. And I started kind of doing, work outside public speaking outside of work. And you could kind of Google me and maybe find some videos of my story. So I got to a point where I was kind of, I guess, sick of running from it. I needed to own my story rather than have it own me if I was going to really thrive in the workplace. And so I started sharing it slowly but surely with colleagues around me and my management and what I thought was going to be something that, set me apart or continued to isolate me in the workplace was actually something that brought me connection that I was really deeply searching for in the workplace. And so for me, what I thought would happen when I shared my story was not what happened. I think people rallied around me and other people shared their stories with me. And I found that I wasn't alone. And I think that was the scariest part for me at work, is I always felt so alone in my struggles there. And it really helped me on a day-to-day basis come to work as my true self and share that with, the other folks in the company. And so, yeah, for me, I guess it was just overwhelming support.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I feel like I found the same thing when I finally came out. And I think every industry is different. And I know that in the legal industry, the stigma is extremely strong. But I think in any industry where our mind is our greatest asset, it's very difficult to come out and say that we think our mind is broken in some way, right? Because that's how it's perceived. Is there anything that you would say to employers that you think could be helpful to creating a space where it's sort of a help-seeking environment is encouraged?
Yeah, and at Medtronic where I work, they have really, really good programs. I think it's really well supported. And I think most companies are kind of getting to that place, but I still think they're missing the folks who really need to reach out and who really need to know that when they do, doors will open for them and people will come to rally by their side. Outside of the programs, I would like to see them better marketed internally, the ones that are there for folks that may be struggling. But I'd also like to see in town halls and larger meetings, rather than always talking about financial results or who had the best project and those types of things. I'd like them to spotlight people like me who would be willing to speak in front of large audiences and talk about how sharing my story internally really turned into a huge positive for me, because I think that there are a lot of people out there who want to tell their story, who want to open up to folks, but are just, once again, scared of that stigma. And I think we need people talking in high level situations inside the company to show that opening up like that is not for everyone. But if you're willing to open up, I would like them to see that there is a supportive workplace and there's a lot of love there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because we know that reducing the stigma, a big part of that is normalizing these conversations, not just spotlighting them once a year because it's Mental Health Month, right? And also what you touched on, modeling from the top. It's one thing to ask an associate to be brave and talk about their journey, but when it's someone in leadership or in a position of power, it really resonates on a different level and gives everyone else permission.
Yeah, can I add to that point too? Because I think when I shared with folks who were on my team, and then some of them kind of had their own stories. And I think when we talk about shared experience, it's not just necessarily them, right? It's family members, it's friends. Like everybody has a shared experience in their life when it comes to mental illness or addiction. And now the people on my team have either been able to share with me, or when they just need a mental health day, or they've got a relative struggling and need a couple days off, they can come to me and be open and honest about why they need that time off and why they need that day. And they know that it's going to be respected and welcomed and actually encouraged. And so for me, sharing with folks that report into me, I think opened a lot of doors for them and made them feel more comfortable with showing up as their true selves.
Right. You've become a safe place, right? And we need more of those. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dorothy, can you speak to us about your experience with alcohol addiction and how that affected you in the workplace?
Yeah, sure. So, that's sort of a two-part question, right? I think that I sort of approach it from what was it like when I was in active addiction? And then I can also sort of speak to how I experience it now, on the other side of that. So, to echo a lot of what's already been said. So I worked for a large national corporation in the moment that I was sort of confronting my own disease. And I will say that company had EAPs galore, right? It had every resource you could pay for, that money could buy, that employers are told they need to support somebody like me. However, what I think is maybe not understood is that somebody like me that's in the throes of my addiction, is scared to reach out to my employer in any way, because I somehow suspect that goes on, you know what I mean, that it's not completely siloed off and protected.
Yeah.
I'm scared that I am not going to stay sober if I put it out there to the world, right? If I say this to my employer and I seek the resources that are there, what if I can't do it? All of those components really make it very, very hard for somebody like me to use that, to just access that resource without some sort of thing in between. So what I ended up doing was reaching out to another person that I knew in my community that had that was sober, that had been where I was. I wasn't even sure in that moment that what I was looking for was, to quit drinking forever. I would say that actually wasn't on my mind at the moment that I asked for help. It is what subsequently came from, going to Alcoholics Anonymous. But I will say that what I've always seen work in recovery from substance abuse is the lived experience, right? The only thing that I've seen work is for one person that has, one alcoholic to talk to another alcoholic about how they experienced their addiction. And so what I say again is basically what Ken says is, like, if a company can turn up the voices, can turn up the volume on the lived experience of the people at that company, that is the best possible way, right? To be that conduit between the person that needs the help and sources that they're paying for to provide the help.
Yeah.
So that's one answer. I want to briefly address the other answer, because a lot of people, like, the preconceived idea, you know, I've been sober for 11 years, is that I don't deal with my addiction and the subsequent personality traits that come from that on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. And I do. And I work in an industry that's pretty fast paced. You know, there's a sales culture behind it. And I will tell you that when I went from working on the carrier side of insurance to the broker side of insurance, man, did it activate every single addiction marker I had in my brain, right? It basically, all of a sudden I was finding myself sort of feeling high again, right? Because I would feel high if I was chasing an opportunity, and I had to, like, really relearn how to deal with that on this side of the business.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you talk about the markers, like, for me, there were so many things that I brought to the industry that were very constructive around building a career in law, like perfectionism and people pleasing and overachieving, but they're very destructive to our mental health, right? And to our own well-being. So they're celebrated in certain areas in your profession. Unfortunately, we get positive reinforcement, right? But we're, like, unraveling inside at the same time. And it's, how do we learn how to reconcile that? It's a very difficult process, especially when you're asked to go it alone. To your point, we're given helplines and hotlines, and God, if we were in the position to just navigate that system on our own, we would have done it, like, a long time ago. We probably wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. So to your point, having somebody, a facilitator in between those two things to walk people through that and give that support, so important. What was your biggest fear about coming clean with your employer? Other than, what if I can't stay sober? What if I say it out loud? And then, which would add even more shame to it, right?
It would have been, what's going to happen once they know that I'm an alcoholic? Every single mistake that I've made over the past 5 years, they're going to think was because I am an alcoholic, because maybe I was drunk, or all of a sudden, all of these excuses that I had made were going to be put into that bucket. That was a humongous fear of mine.
Yeah.
And that is, again, why I say, like, I don't know. I think Ken can probably speak to this. I mean, I think all panelists can speak to this. Once you confront what you're dealing with, there is a warming period you have with becoming the person that is dealing with it, right? And it's not necessarily something that you immediately want to let your employer in on. It took me years to be out and totally open and transparent about what I deal with. And so I'd say that that's probably.
Yeah. There's another skill set, right, that comes with what the ramifications may be in the workplace, right? And that's not when you're just immediately ready to sort of step off that ledge. You have to sort of grow wings a little bit before you can actually do that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Michael, you come to us with lived experience in depression. Can you talk to us about how that presented for you? I believe it didn't start until later in life, while you were actually practicing, and then how that affected you in the workplace.
Sure. Thanks, Wendy. And yeah, I also wanted to say how inspired I am by and how much resonates with me about what others have said already. But yeah, I actually never really thought much about mental health in my life until my mid-30s, when I experienced depression for the first time. I'm a lawyer. I was a young partner in a law firm. And for me, look, not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, but mentally ill health is very difficult, right? It's a combination of chemistry and childhood experiences and and habits and stressors. And for me, I think it manifested for the first time in my life at that time because I was having a really stressful period at work. I was a new partner. I was running a really stressful case. And I was also at the same time having, difficult struggles in my personal life. I was having issues with my marriage, and I think those two things, maybe independently, I could sort of navigate, and maybe had for my life navigated one or the other. But the two of them together, exceeded some threshold for me, and I didn't have good coping skills, and it manifested for me at work of basically going to work and really feeling like I wasn't functioning the way I normally was at all. In fact, I would go to work and just not be able to do things. And until that period, I was really fast moving and big on multitasking, and a lot of the sort of lawyer personality traits that you mentioned, Wendy, which I'm sure are not unique to law, but the perfectionism and the responding quickly and the decisiveness, all that kind of went away, and it was really shocking to me because I hadn't experienced it previously. So it would get to the point where I couldn't respond to emails, I couldn't get things done, and because I was like, if I go this one way, that's bad. If I go this other way, that's bad. And it just turned into this sort of stress, anxiety spiral. And it got to the point where I would go to work and just sort of shut the door and not be able to work, and then I would leave. And you can't do that for many days in a row as a lawyer, right? You have all of yesterday's stuff, and then you do that for a day, and then you have more stuff coming in tomorrow, and it just it takes a few days before you feel like you're really underwater. And at that time, that was really hard to navigate. My initial unhealthy inclination was to sort of push through, and this is just stress, and I'll work through it. And luckily, I just had really good family support, and my sister and others said, it's not just work stress. You're not going to push through it, and really kind of got me to see a therapist and start, really learning about this for the first time. So it was difficult to navigate when it first manifested, and like Ken and others have said, like you feel alone. You feel like, oh my God, I'm going through this really debilitating thing, and I can't tell anyone, and there's a lot of shame and stigma around it. So when it first manifested, and that was over 10 years ago now, I think about kind of where I am now, versus then. And it took a long time. I also started writing about it, thinking about it, talking about depression, but never at work, and never with work people, because I had the fears that so many others mentioned. But the reality of it is that I've had very few conversations since I started speaking very openly about it that have been negative. And in fact, what I found is that whether it's mentally ill health, or whether it's sort of navigating the everyday ups and downs of life, or whether it's being touched by this, because I think if it's you or a family member or a friend or a colleague, we're talking about 10 out of 10 people on planet Earth that are dealing with this in some way. So I have found a lot of power in talking about it and in the storytelling aspects, and so that's a big change, and it's taken a lot of time. Because I know the initial inclination is this is weakness. So one of the things I tried to push and continue to is, not weak, just human. And so in the workplace, you have unique issues. I think, there are institutional issues and institutional problems that make it difficult to speak up, and difficult to get help. And I think that is shifting. But institutional problems need institutional solutions, and that's why I always come back when I'm talking about this issue to talking about culture, and talking about storytelling. And I think those are very buzzy terms that a lot of people are talking about it. But the reason I think it's really important is because there is great power in sharing your story, and when you do, it does open it up and allow others to share, and it allows commonality of experience to be shared. And I think workplaces are really uniquely, most workplaces are really uniquely suited to helping people deal with this issue. I think when you're down in it, and you have an assignment and you feel, oh my God, I can't do this, I can't get this done, the fact of the matter is, in many large law firms, there's lots of other people that can step in and do that. So I think navigating through that, I think, really helps us in the workplace. But there are some big barriers to overcome.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said like exceeded the threshold of my mental capacity almost, because when I think about that, I think about our physical health. And if you put a tendon or a bone under certain amount of stress, it will break, right? We will injure it. And it's the same sort of thing with our mind. There's only so much we can take until we need rest, some sort of rehabilitation or therapy, or it's the same with a knee as it is with a mind, if you think about it that way.
Yeah,
And I love when you talk about storytelling. Just when we feel less alone, that's when we're more able to go find the resources that we need to help us. But if we feel isolated, those resources are sort of dead to us.
yeah.
They're just much less of an option.
Yeah, I feel I just on that point of storytelling, I just feel like in the beginning it's hard, especially for young folks. And I think about myself now as a partner versus myself as an associate. And I think that as a partner, I'd rather hear from someone if they're struggling practically to handle the work. I can help. I can shift it to other people. I can make sure to get it done. And also, you want your good people to be well and have their brains functioning optimally, and be there for you. So in the back then, through the lens of youth, I had this really sort of fear about speaking out. But now, kind of looking backwards, I want to encourage an environment and culture where people can speak out, because I think that's better for us as humans, and also it aligns really well with doing the work piece better.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Having walking malpractice risk is not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So turning it to brother, let's hear about your PTSD and how it presents for you, and perhaps how it's been triggered by the environment that you're in as a professional chef.
Yeah. First off, thank you so much to everyone for sharing their stories. I think reliving the pain of our own stories is not for us to experience; it's for someone else to hear. And it's extremely powerful to hear everyone else's pieces on this. As far as me as a chef, as a business owner, as a personality and advocate for mental health, I talk a lot on that. I'm currently sitting in a high school in North Dakota after giving 4 speeches to high school students yesterday on validation, on mental health, on protecting yourself and not thinking about the insecurities and being able to be vulnerable. As a chef, I'm always in the kitchen, and there's so many elements of pressure, and that's a piece that can easily break a person, especially when you come from trauma or some type of rough background. I was on a show called Top Chef, and being eliminated the second time on national television actually hit something I didn't expect. It was a lot of my background of neglect and rejection, and being in this hotel room um, for a number of days without any contact to the outside world actually triggered something I wasn't ready for. I started listening to the voices that are inside that internal struggle that is saying you're not good enough. You failed. I gave up on myself, and I didn't expect that because of a show, because of work. I was chasing validation in my career. And I think so many of us get caught up in the next title, the corner office, the next paycheck, the promotion, the recognition of our peers. We get lost in what's most important, which is, can you look yourself in the mirror and be proud of that person? No one can validate you except you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's so important for so many people to hear, is that work is not going to make you a better person internally. You have to begin to address what's going on with your past, with your present, ignoring the problem doesn't make the problem go away. And so many of us have these closets that are just shoved with all these emotions and experiences and traumas that we don't want to deal with. But at some point, those hinges are going to burst. And when they burst, you're on the other side of a wall you built, and it's extremely lonely. So I talk a lot on, we have to remember that a, an enemy is always going to try to single you out. And when you're alone, you're most vulnerable. That's when you're meant to be attacked. So we have to come together as a group. We have to come together as a team. You have to have a strong community and support system to give you a little bit more encouragement to be able to move forward, right? Every day is a choice. We have this new page every morning. What story are you going to write? What's the chapter going to look like? Are you telling yourself the end before you've even written it? That's such a big piece that I think a lot of us get caught up in. And I think it applies to any profession, whether it's restaurant or legal or sales. There's so many different elements of, we're really all just chasing validation.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I feel like I got chills up my back at some point there. We could just end right there. That's all so true and so beautifully put and so inspiring. I know that you've talked about toxic masculinity and how that has had a negative effect on your own mental health. Can you talk about that maybe specifically in your industry? I mean, I think that it's a wider problem than that, but is there something about your industry that breeds that? And is there a way where employers in that industry can protect their people from it?
Absolutely. A chef is a leader, right? It translates literally to chief. You are the chief of the tribe. And as the tribe leader, you're expected to be strong and powerful. And I think as a person in charge, you're constantly worried about how you're being viewed. And talking about emotions, especially as a man, has always been a weakness. You don't do that. Keep that to yourself. You don't cry. Don't share. I'm human. We're all human. And I think that's such an important part to discuss. Toxic masculinity is exactly that. It's toxic and it's going to break you down. We can't get caught up in this mantra of strength is not talking about what's going on. It actually takes more strength to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And as I've created my own culture within my own businesses, I've been very vulnerable as a leader because I want my staff, this next generation, to understand it's okay to talk about how you're feeling. You don't have to hold it in. You can actually trust people. There's a lot of people out there who want to help, who want nothing from you. And I think that's where we get caught up in, I don't want to be viewed as weak because I'm not willing to trust anyone and I can do it on my own. You know, that's ego. And ego is just overdressed insecurity.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. We have a few questions where, already at our time, close to our time. So we're going to dive into some questions from the audience now. Not specific for anyone. So when I read it, just, let me know if you want to dive right in. There's someone here who's recently been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and they want to tell their manager, but they're afraid of what they might say. Can anyone speak to maybe how to start that conversation? Like, not theoretically, but where do you start that conversation? Mike, go ahead.
So yeah, I can jump in on that because that was a concern for me when I was experiencing depression, when I was diagnosed with depression, and I'm sure everyone else here can relate to that fear, and and actually, last year I had a recurrence of my depression, number of reasons, but navigating stressful client demands and COVID and being isolated and sort of the collective trauma I think that we all went through. I had a recurrence and it got to the point where my therapist said, hey, I think you should take some time off from work. And, whether it's an accommodation like needing some time off or just, needing a couple days here or just needing, accommodations at work. It's a scary conversation to have. And I think for me, when I went to take time off from work, I sent a one-line email to the head of HR and sort of the head of my practice unit, just saying, my doctor says that I'm sick and need to take time off. And I got a very, the one-line email I got back was, we understand, do what you need and keep us updated. So that wasn't a very frank discussion, because I was scared. And the response was very like legalistic, right? Okay, you need time off. Everyone kind of knows what's going on, I think, but nobody wants to say it. But I think what was most helpful was actually conversations that I had that were more frank, because there were people at work that I did trust, people I had long relationships with, people who were my partners, people who I knew had navigated similar things, either themselves or with their family. And I think finding those people, and I found one of those people. I'm very grateful to my partner, and I was very open with him. And I said, look, I'm scared and I'm worried, but right now, this is what I need, and I've navigated this before. But this is what I need, and can you help me? And he helped me. He helped me to navigate things like making sure other people were assigned to my things, making sure that it was communicated to others what was going on without me having to do all that, so I could just go take care of myself.
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple different layers there, but I think finding a trusted manager or person that you feel you can have that conversation with, I think is really helpful to deal with the reality of things. For me, it was really helpful.
Yeah.
Wendy, can I answer that quickly?
Yep, absolutely.
So I guess I always look at it this way. For one, like the environment in which we live in today, right? These conversations are usually very well received. And so in this situation, right, honesty is always the best policy, right? So for one, whether or not your manager reacts good or bad, you've still gotten it off your chest, you've got it out there. And for people like us, that's really important, right? It's not inside anymore. We told someone. There are two outcomes, and it's going to be a favorable outcome most of the times, but if not, now you really understand that this is not the person you want to work for long term. If they can't support you and all of your needs and your mental health, then they were not the person that you need for your future and to get better. You are now in a toxic situation, and this just kind of lets you know it's time to get out.
Yeah. We have one specifically about someone working on their line who has bipolar disorder. So I think, brother, this might be good for you. This person doesn't speak about it with their boss, but the boss knows that it impacts her mental well-being at work. He or she says, how can I open this conversation with her? I really want to be doing all that I can to support her well-being. So when somebody's sort of bottled up inside, but we know it's out there, how would you say it's most healthy and safe to approach that conversation?
Yeah, I think timing is always one of the most important pieces of when to have that discussion. There's a chef in Sacramento that actually has a temperature box when the staff clock in every day to drop in where they're at, what's going on. I think those messages of being anonymous are a good start, just to kind of get a temperament of how the team's going to respond before you just kind of put it out there. But working for a leader, it's extremely important to have trust. And if you don't have the trust or the confidence in that person, I think that's definitely a concern. We have to get to the point of being in a culture, especially in restaurants, where there's no fear of retaliation or a difference in treatment because I've voiced this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm struggling with. It's a company's responsibility to ensure that you're getting the tools, the training, and the support to be successful. So I think it kind of starts with, maybe have that conversation anonymously and kind of see where the response is, and then, follow up and see where it goes. And it might not be the best place if that's kind of the culture where, you're going to feel attacked, or you're going to feel someone's coming at you for how you're going through it.
Yeah, and I would just say that, safety is always the biggest issue for me in my mental health issues, and it has been for my whole life. So if somebody came to me and said, I'm a safe place for you to talk about whatever you're struggling with, and whenever you're ready, know that you can come to me and it will be confidential, but I want you to thrive in this space. And I know that it's difficult right now for you, right? Just presenting that safe space, I think to start is probably a good way to approach it as well. There
Yeah.
are a few
Can I add
others.
one thing? Just one
Yeah,
quick thing.
sure.
I just think from the perspective of leaders, it's a little bit of a new thing to be involved in these conversations. And I understand people saying, how do I approach this? I know I was speaking at law schools and I was thinking about the students and I heard from some administrators that there's a whole class of professors who say, oh my God, I don't know how to have these conversations. What if they tell me something and I don't know the right thing to say? So I think it's a legitimate concern. I think it's something that we have to get more training on. But I do think that just as human beings, if we are, authentic and vulnerable and share of ourselves, and like you said, Wendy, and like you said, brother, create that culture where people know it's okay to come to you when they need to. I think that goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dorothy, did you have something to say? I thought I saw, sorry, I thought I saw you raise your hand. But I just want to, a lot of my work is about empowering and educating those people who are in a position of power, who haven't had mental health struggles, so don't know how to approach these conversations or how to help their people. Because if you don't feel empowered in a space, you tend to sit back and just hope everything's going well, right? To sort of ignore it. So I echo that it's very important that we train people to know what to do when somebody says or just expresses in the unspoken ways that they are just not okay, that they're struggling. Like, what's the next step?
Yeah, I can add something to that because it's such an interesting thing. I think nobody, even myself, doesn't quite feel equipped sometimes when somebody comes to us with something like this, right? We sort of toggle between like, what can I do to help? How do I, so I think that there's a delicate balance of helping facilitate and guide people to the right place and not coming into the crisis with them, right? And I think because I do have my own experience, I think it's bringing that human touch to it, to be there for somebody in that moment, but to help get them to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So there are a few others just talking about, how do we lessen the stigma around substance abuse disorder and mental illness in the workplace? If you could maybe pick one word, because we're running out of time, that you think is essential to getting rid of this stigma, what would it be? Let's start with Ken.
Vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Great. Dorothy?
It's not one word, but talk about it.
Communication. Yeah, great. Mike?
I don't have one word, but I will say that storytelling is critical. Sharing of ourselves is critical. But I also want to say that destigmatizing is important and wonderful. But it's also only the first step. That means that we're having a conversation. But I think from there, it's also what structures, what policies, what things can we put into play in our workplaces that provide solutions. But it's first, of course, important to talk about the problem. And I think the way we do that is, by sharing of ourselves.
Great. Brother?
Assumption, right? Give me the chance as a leader to correct the situation or change the culture. Don't write the end of the story before we've actually had the conversation.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Yeah, and cultural change is so important and sort of the umbrella to all of that. So with that, thank you all so much for coming and sharing your stories. This is incredibly powerful. I hope it's been helpful for everyone who's been here and shared this time with us. I think we can all agree that as everyone has echoed here, that when we stop hiding and we become vulnerable and brave and courageous enough to speak our truth and find our voice, whether in therapy or speaking to our boss or writing a book, that's when we find that connection and that support that we've always been looking for, right? It breaks through that sense of isolation. So it's through our shared stories that we feel less alone. And that's the most powerful ingredient to everyone's mental well-being. So I thank you all for coming today and sharing your stories and being examples of what is possible, and proving that our vulnerability is truly our greatest strength. So with that, be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.